Podcast Network's family of shows. Available.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back into the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. And for our fourth segment of today's show, we start my weekly positional rankings for Week 10 of the NFL season with my QBs. And this might just be the list that is most contentious for me. The QB position has been such an interesting position to diagnose, to analyze throughout my career here, the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, talking about fantasy football. Because I always try and find certain matchups that you might overlook or might not even think about in terms of starting and sitting the quarterback position. This week, I made some decisions that I feel like will create a lot of skepticism and tension. But I feel confident in them because these are all guys who have shown me something throughout the season that at the very least can prove to me that in certain matchups, some admittedly tougher than others, that they can produce for you at certain levels. So without further ado, let's talk about the QBs who I think will dominate Week 10. And one that I'm going to start off with, the first one on my list, is looking a little bit sketchy after what happened to him this week on the Thursday night game against the Jets. But I still have faith in him. It's perhaps the toughest matchup that I've ever put on this list for any quarterback, and probably will be for the rest of the season. CJ Stroud going up against the Lions. Now, I know what everyone's thinking who's watching here. I think that, this matchup now certainly feels a little bit worse than, before the Jets game. And I was anticipating that CJ Stroud was going to find a certain rhythm. Because out of all the quarterbacks I'm going to name, he has been someone who really struggled to gain any sort of consistency. I feel like all of the quarterbacks I'm going to name either are consistent or, just haven't had much opportunities to show how they can play, especially in a fantasy football perspective. And CJ Stroud certainly has. And I know that this matchup seems a little bit weird for him and highly difficult. But the reason why I feel like in this matchup CJ Stroud can excel is because of the fact when I look at how simple this Texans offense can become, to where he can either rely on Joe Mixon or feel like even without, guys like Collins and Diggs helping him out, that he can pass the football effectively. That CJ Stroud is at a position where it's just all about his own poise. I feel like at this juncture in the season, he's kind of in his own head right now. I feel like the problems that we've seen from him that we didn't see last season stem from either frustration, tension, inadequacy even maybe, or something that is mentally blocking him from performing well. It's not necessarily, anything to do with play calls, offensive identity, or anything like that. I think it's just a mental barrier that is preventing CJ Stroud from being, a guy you can rely on week in, week out. And there's no better place for mental barriers to be broken than against the Lions in a very important game for both of these squads. Because the thing is, even if the Texans lose this game, they very well could, because the Lions could be the best team in football right now. CJ Stroud and the Texans would be in a good place. That's why I'm taking a risk here. Because the Texans are a team that still, despite whether or not they lose or win this game, still feel like in a weak AFC South, they're going to win the division. And so, that's why I feel like CJ Stroud is someone you should still have hope for. Just because there's going to be little to no pressure going forward for him in games of this nature and magnitude. Just because he knows that Texans have headway in this AFC South race. And so that's why, when thinking about fantasy QBs, while he might not be appealing, Jay Stroud in certain matchups could play better than you think. And I'm going to take him boldly in this Lions game. And the second guy I want to talk about, Russell Wilson. Let's talk about him a little bit. This is going to be a very interesting game. I'm going to be talking about this game all week. Coming off the bye, though, going up against the Commanders, I feel like Russell Wilson's one of those quarterbacks who, no matter whether it's after the bye or in the flow of the week, always feels like someone who's going to be prepared for whatever task is ahead of him. And the Commanders right now feel like a team that have been very impressive all season, perhaps even more so than Pittsburgh. But yesterday against the Giants showed some vulnerabilities, especially in the defensive side of the football. And I know it sounds crazy considering the fact that, Daniel Jones only had one touchdown pass and 0 yards in the first half. I know that's a weird stat, but it's still, a little bit sketchy for me to consider the Commanders that much more elite than the Steelers. And what I like about the Steelers right now is that they have so much more options available to them with Russell Wilson at the helm, especially in the passing game. And Russell Wilson is not going to sit back and have the game come to him like Daniel Jones. He's going to attack early and often. He's going to be very comfortable under center, and play action, rolling out, doing whatever is required of him. And you know that he, especially after a bye, is going to always come ready to play. And so that's why I feel like Russell Wilson is going to be someone to watch this week in fantasy, because even though a lot of people might not want to start him, maybe he's still up there on waiver wires just because nobody knew what the Steelers were going to do with the QB position. But I feel like he's proven himself enough that he can have a lot of value, not even just as a starter, but in a super flex league, 2B2. He's proven that he can do it against teams, yes, not necessarily up this level of the Commanders and going forward of potentially Baltimore, Cincinnati, but he still can prove to be someone who's competent enough to get the job done for the Steelers week in, week out. And the third guy, another kind of weird one, but playing in a much easier matchup than he had this week, Caleb Williams, kind of ran into a buzzsaw against a very motivated, all of a sudden, Arizona Cardinals team that's proving that they're more than capable of competing in the NFC West, as scary as it is as a Seattle fan. But Caleb, even though he looked like he regressed a little bit, not as comfortable as he was with the past 3 weeks, he still has merit as someone who can, in certain matchups, find his footing. And not for nothing, this is the easiest one to pick in terms of matchups, because he's playing a Patriots team that has a lot of emotionality to it now with Drake May, a lot of grit now, a lot of toughness to it, but I still think that Caleb Williams, this game, he's going to wipe from his memory, he's going to wipe the slate clean, and go into this Patriots game knowing that he should be a heavy favorite, and he should be confident enough to get back to what we saw in that 3-week sample of some of his best football in the NFL to date. So that's why I feel like Caleb has a lot of value this week. And the last one, this one I kind of feel like could go either way. Because like I said, he was my first NFL fantasy star of the week. But I still feel like, this is going to be one of those trap games potentially where Harbaugh's going to be insistent on one thing when I feel like it can play into the other. So Justin Herbert, actually, is a little bit more skeptical in my mind than CJ Stroud against the Titans, even though it's a much easier matchup on paper. The reason why I feel that way is because I love Justin Herbert and what he's done against the teams he can potentially pass against, let's say, has been nothing short of impressive. Against the Cardinals, very efficient. Against, like I said, Cleveland, very efficient as well. probably can be efficient against the Titans, but it's all up to the game plan that Harbaugh puts forth for him. And I feel like, this Titans defense is actually pretty physical. And even though there's a lot of rumors surrounding certain players leaving it, like Joseph Day, and potentially, Harold Landry might be on the market for some teams, it still is one of those defenses where they can kind of drag you into their game a little bit. So it's going to be interesting to see Harbaugh operate in this game. Because while C.J. Stroud versus the Lions can go either way, Justin Herbert against the Titans is weird because A, he's elite, but he's not been someone who's been throwing the football downfield as much because of this new look offense. And B, I don't know how week in, week out Jim Harbaugh is going to play things. Is he going to let the reins loose on this game, or is he going to try and stay conservative as possible and win in whatever way he can? Which he can, but you can take your foot off the gas a little bit against teams like the Titans. Allow Justin Herbert to get into the flow of things. Because if they do happen to sneak into the playoffs, you're not going to be able to run the football on people's throats there. So you're going to want to see what Justin Herbert is capable of. We know he's highly capable. So this game's going to be all about Jim Harbaugh here. Do you let Justin Herbert loose, or do you reel him in a little bit? And that's going to determine whether or not this hits on a different level for you come next Sunday. But I should just about do it for this segment. First of many positional rankings, but last but not least for today's show, my Don't Be Surprised If segment to close the show out. We'll be right back after this short break.